Hello, my name is Dylan. I'm the host of the Truth Speaks Network. This will be our first show, and today we'll be discussing the JFK conspiracy, specifically Lee Harvey Oswald. And I brought on my friend who's a bigger expert on the topic than I am. Chuck, did we disconnect?
No, we didn't disconnect, Dylan. I'm here.
All right.
My name is Chuck Ocelli. I'm often referred to as the blind JFK researcher. I'm also the host of the Ocelli Effect, which is on UCY.TV radio. And I do shows on all kinds of topics, but mainly I got a little bit of notice before that in the internet world, sort of, as a JFK researcher, and spent a lot of time actually over the course of a couple of decades studying the subject with various other researchers as well. So, you want to discuss Lee Harvey Oswald today, right?
He's a fascinating person, and the most questionable thing about that day.
Well, certainly one of the most questionable things about that day. I'll give you that one. Oswald is a character who, according to your mainstream historians and according to the mainstream media, essentially, was your, most exemplar of the whole lone nut scenario. The guy who happens to be a singular individual who, for his own motivations, goes after and attempts to sort of strike his name in the history books. And although he is the accused assassin of our 35th president, he was never convicted as such in any court or among anything outside of the Warren Commission, who found that he was the sole individual responsible for that event. And of course, he was also found to be responsible, although not alone, by the House Select Committee in the 70s as well. So, when we look at Oswald, we got to we first have to understand that there was a lot of propaganda here, and although involved in closing the case quickly, especially because although JFK was killed on a Friday, Oswald was dead on a Sunday, and they were both buried on a Monday.
We had a problem.
Oh, okay.
On the live stream, your mic got cut off.
Oh.
For about 10 seconds there.
I see. Do we know where I got cut off?
A moment ago.
Okay, no problem. Well, let me just go back to this then. Like I said, John F. Kennedy was killed November 22nd, 1963, which was a Friday. On November 24th, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald was killed on live television, which I believe was the first time a human being had been killed on live television. And on Monday, the 25th of November of that year, they were both buried. Okay, so in order to sort of assuage the fears of the nation in sort of a quick fashion, this is the contention, mind you, of the mainstream historians and the mainstream media, that Oswald needed to be convicted in the public's mind right away. In fact, there were memos directly that day that stated that they needed to convince the American public that he had been the sole assassin. And as I said before, the Warren Commission had found that he was the sole assassin of John F. Kennedy.
Of course they did. They're overseen by the people we think did it.
Well, in my opinion, yes, most definitely. The most illustrative point of that is that when you collate the activity of the Warren commissioners, which included, John J. McCloy, who had been the chancellor of Germany in post-World War II Germany, and had actually been responsible for commuting the death sentences of many Nazi war criminals. But it was also known to be the head of the Chase Manhattan Bank at one point. You have, of course, Gerald R. Ford, who would later become one of our presidents after the disgraced resignation of Richard Nixon. You have Earl Warren, who was the head of the Supreme Court, and you have the most interesting character there, in my opinion anyway, was definitely Allen Dulles, who had been the head of the CIA.
Can't you also add on to that list E. Howard Hunt?
Well, E. Howard Hunt wasn't part of the Warren Commission.
That's true. Sorry.
So the thing is that, but Dulles, the reason why I focus on Dulles here is because when you actually look at the hearings and the executive sessions of the Warren Commission council meetings, you find that the most active member actually was Allen Dulles. So really, the Warren Commission is kind of a misnomer. It should have been called the Dulles Commission. And he had been, like I said, the fired head of the CIA after the disastrous Bay of Pigs event. So, you know, you're taking a guy who was removed from his practically lifelong appointment to the head of the intelligence agencies by the guy who was murdered. You're allowing him to conduct the investigation, essentially. So, you know, you can take that for what it's worth, and if you don't believe me, you can check the actual collated events and the numeric value of what I'm saying. You can find in a book called The Warren Omission by Walt Brown. But it is absolutely obvious when you look at it that he was the most active and most vocal member of the commission. Now, of course, everybody knows about some of the junior council members, like Arlen Specter, who was the most often is attributed to be the author of the single bullet theory, or what he later dubbed the single bullet fact. He died a couple of years ago, and he was actually at that time a young Philadelphia lawyer, but he actually conducted a lot of the questioning of witnesses and really controlled the information that witnesses were going to be allowed to give. But that is the Warren Commission. Now, they found that Oswald was the sole person responsible. But when you look at day one of Warren Commission hearings and the committees that they formed for themselves right away, you know, the first couple of committees had to do with, you know, investigating the entire life history of Lee Harvey Oswald, and then another committee was formed to investigate the entire history of all people that knew Lee Harvey Oswald. And if that's being done on day one, it sounds to me quite a bit like there was only a prosecution. Of course, people know Mark Lane, who was approached after writing an article in the Guardian newspaper by Marguerite Oswald, who was Lee Harvey Oswald's mother. And actually, Mark Lane was retained at one point by Marguerite Oswald to represent her son's interests with the commission. Now, that being said, the Warren Commission disallowed Mr. Lane from being able to do so, but did call him as a witness. They also appointed someone from the American Bar Association, who I think showed up for about 2 meetings the entire time, to sort of protect Oswald's interests in the case. So we can see exactly how the deck was stacked there, and there's plenty of nonsense that we could spend all kinds of time on dissecting as far as the Warren Commission goes, but really we're only going for 2 hours today, so we don't have enough time. Now, to look at Lee Harvey Oswald and the truth, here's a couple of undisputed facts. He had 2 brothers, John Pick and Robert Oswald. They were older than Lee. Lee was the youngest of Marguerite's children. Now, before Lee was born, shortly before he was born, his father actually died. And people like to bring up the whole, you know, crazy kid Oswald, misguided young man theory, and they often cite this. They also like to cite the fact that he was rather fascinated by a television series called I Led 3 Lives. And if you take a good look at that little television series and search it out online, you'll find out why that's a convenient sort of little factoid that's always been added to this particular narrative.
Well, that's what they use whenever they want to cover something up, is those little facts that really prove insignificant otherwise.
Well, that's the thing. That's why I identified it as a factoid, because you know, what TV shows he was watching as a child is really irrelevant. They also like to, you know, they did do a pretty good job at uncovering some of his earlier records, like his school records and things like that, because they wanted to show that he was a delinquent, that he was a malcontent, and that he had sort of, you know, strange ideas about himself. Now, they also have introduced a few other interesting documents over time, like, for instance, there's something that he calls his historical diary or historical journal, which is supposed to be written by him entirely. And this is also used quite often to sort of build this psychological image of Oswald as a angry, disenchanted, disgruntled, non-American communist, attention seeker, who was a complete failure in life and had no choice but to turn around and do something desperate in order to make himself feel as though he was valuable. But a very fascinating contrast to that, because that has always been an argument when it comes to lone assassins over time, is that Lee Harvey Oswald, although there have been a handful of presidential assassins in American history, Lee Harvey Oswald is distinguished in that he never actually claimed that he did it. He actually denied it fully in front of cameras on live television to the police. You know, every which way you turn, this guy was denying that he had done it. He was denying that he had done it wrong. Everybody knows the story of John Wilkes Booth having jumped from the theater box at Ford's Theater after shooting Abraham Lincoln in the head and screaming, you know, Sic Semper Tyrannis, you know, death to tyrants, or, you know, tyrant falls, or, you know, depending on how you interpret that. But, you know, and the guy who shot, let's see, I think it was McKinley, did pretty much the same thing, even though McKinley was most famously stating, you know, please don't hurt him when they were taking him into custody and everything else. This guy was, you know, hoping that he had killed him. People that had attempted to kill Andrew Jackson were quite proud of what they attempted to do.
Yeah.
All of these people.
Well,
So
those two are. That one was actually interesting, but I don't know much about that. But let's. Can I ask another question, or can I ask a question real fast? Sorry if I cut you off.
Not a problem. Go right ahead.
Even if he denied it, couldn't you make the argument that he was afraid?
Well, certainly you can make the argument that he was afraid, but the reasonable expectation here for anybody who had been taken into custody and had the media frenzy that was on him that weekend would be that, gee, they won't do anything too terrible to me because they'll have to explain it to the news media, which had descended upon Dallas at that point in time. It is most instructive to understand that that was the first time that the news media went live for 24-hour periods. That entire weekend, in fact, is memorialized on videotape in a unique way. For the first time, we see 24-hour news coverage happening on American television. So there is that. There's a lot more to that story, but let's just continue on with his childhood and this and that a little bit. Now I'm pointing out some of the facts that, like I say, the mainstream and the more acceptable, you know, lone nut Oswald people like to point to so far. But believe me, we're going to, you know, go quite far off of those rails real soon. So here's the deal. This kid is supposedly, you know, truant from school, has difficulty getting along, has difficulty socializing, and like I said, all this stuff is meant to sort of paint the portrait that he is, you know, this malcontent, angry, disgruntled, disenchanted young guy. Now, to put all this in proper context, Lee Harvey Oswald was 24 years of age at the time he died. Okay? So I'm going to skip over some of his childhood here, even though, believe me, you could spend a decade without a problem studying the odd and interesting facts there. There have been authors who have taken time to see that the record of his childhood has a lot of contradictions in it. You'll find that his name seems to be enrolled in multiple schools in different geographic locations. His name is convoluted, changed around, and everything else. These things are all disputable. If you want to see a really intense study of that stuff, there's a guy named John Armstrong who wrote a book called Harvey and Lee, and he explains in that book his theory, which I do not agree with, by the way. However, his research is pretty intense on the subject. But his actual conclusion is that there were two different guys. One was named Harvey, one was named Lee, and they were sort of conflagrated into one character for the sake of the assassination.
Not completely impossible, but it doesn't seem likely that they would do that, because there's too many contradictions if they were going to do that.
Well, right. I think that there's just a sloppiness in the fashion by which records were kept at that time. I think that there's an inconsistency in record keeping at that time anyway.
Right.
But also, it's very convenient for people to pick this kind of thing up and muddy the water so that the clear truth is not so easily found. So, at a slightly early age, here's where we're going to pick up a couple of facts that I think are not disputed by anyone, essentially, except those that believe that there were 2, 3, 4 different Oswalds. If you agree that there's one guy, then we can pick it up from here. He tried to join the Marine Corps at an age about a year or two early, okay, and was turned away. But then when he could join the Marine Corps, did so, okay. But right away, he was very much about going into the Marine Corps, and I don't think that this is necessarily something that could be pointed to say that he was a patriotic person necessarily, but he may have actually been trying to get away from his mother, who was apparently a rather controlling and sort of manipulative figure. Now, the reason why I say this, and I am in line with the mainstream historians on this, is because I know from experience, firsthand, secondhand, etc., that Marguerite Oswald used to refuse to speak to people unless you paid her, and she had an idea that her story was just as important as Lee's, and she wanted to be compensated at any point for talking to anybody. And she sort of had a weird attitude about this whole thing.
That's an interesting ego.
Yeah, it was an interesting ego, and but I'll tell you, she does give us a couple of rather fascinating sort of points of view here. People think that the idea that Oswald was an intelligence agent or was working for the United States government all the way up to the time he died, ostensibly, is a new idea. It's not. Marguerite Oswald was pretty much screaming it from the moment he died.
Oh, yeah, I was actually just about to ask if we could touch on that. How did he come in contact with them, and do you think they were involved with the actual event?
Well, it does seem to me as though the military intelligence people had to have been. But that is my opinion, again. The deal here with Oswald getting in contact will go a little further into his history. So he enters the Marine Corps. Everyone knows the arguments about his marksmanship and whether he was a good shot, a decent shot, a fair shot.
A terrible one, like he was.
Right. He was clearly not a marksman of any kind. I mean, he did at one point score pretty well on the firing range, but he was inconsistent, and consistency is very important when you're trying to train a sniper, or you're talking about someone being able to be an effective weapon. But either way, this guy wasn't destined for infantry by the by. He actually ended up as a radar operator and was part of the U-2 spy program, and at one point had even been stationed in Atsugi in Japan, which is where one of the major CIA-controlled U-2 bases was. So here is where we begin.
And wasn't he also stationed in Russia for a good amount of time under the Defector project?
Okay, here's the problem with that. He was never stationed in Russia. Let's finish up with the Atsugi deal, just in a brief sort of fashion. So he was stationed there and was part of that as a radar operator. He had some information about the what was supposed to be a completely clandestine, but it was one of the worst kept secrets on the planet about the U-2 spy plane. Okay, so he was involved in ground control for these planes. Okay, so this puts him in direct contact with CIA assets, military intelligence assets, Office of Naval Intelligence assets, and it is, in my opinion, this sort of conflagration of military and civilian intelligence creatures lends itself to the nexus of what's going to happen to this guy next. Okay, so he's involved in this work, and then through a hardship discharge, which was not the easiest thing to get because his mother was supposedly injured, back home, he needed to be discharged from the military and from his responsibilities and sent back home. He had relatively no difficulty with doing that and was honorably discharged for a hardship discharge, okay? And went home. to his mother, who had supposedly been injured when a box fell on her leg. All right,
And
this is
he got discharged for that.
not kidding you. This is part of the official story as well as what I understand personally. So, you know, you can double check this stuff all the way through. Anybody who tells the story of Oswald who doesn't give you this fact does not know what happened. Okay.
Or is
Meanwhile,
deliberately trying to hide it.
well, here's a couple of interesting facts also, is that during his time in the military, at one point he had failed a physical exam because he had contracted gonorrhea, okay? He failed a physical exam contracting gonorrhea, but the excuse written right there in bold on the military doctor's report states that he did not contract gonorrhea through his own misadventures, but had actually contracted it in the line of duty. Okay, so it is one of the most astounding documents, and the first place I can think of where you can find it in many books, you can find it online if you like, but an easy place to find it would be in Jim Marr's Crossfire. I know the document exists in there.
So
but he was also at one point put in the brig for discharging an unauthorized handgun, and is even said to have shot himself in the leg with the damn thing. So, you know, there goes the marksmanship again.
yeah. So you were talking about off the air a while back how you interviewed his best friend from Russia.
Well, yeah, I actually did that on my show. But hold on, because I didn't get to the Russia question, and I wanted to finish it up. I needed to build you that bridge to get him back home, and here's why. 3 days later, okay, there's a little bit of an argument of exactly how long this took.
But it was pretty quick.
But let's just say within 1 week's time, from the time he landed back in either Texas or New Orleans, depending on who you talk to, okay, after the military discharged him honorably under a hardship, request and all that, within days, this kid is on his way to the Soviet Union as a tourist. Okay? So he's now ostensibly discharged from the military, but on his way to the Soviet Union as a tourist. So he goes there, which is not the easiest thing to do, has to lay over in another country and then make his way into the Soviet Union. There was a whole lot of sort of political difficulties with doing that for an American at that time, but he had none. Now, going there, when you arrived in the Soviet Union, you were given like sort of a intelligence agency babysitter, which he was given at the time, and he went and did his little tourism thing. Now, this kid, again, with no money, supposedly, is over there staying at a pretty nice hotel, is over there visiting the sites, seeing, Lenin's tomb and what have you, whatever sites there were to see, under a tourist visa. Okay? So a few days before the tourist visa is about to expire, he tells his little escort there, her name was Rima something or other, I think it's Sharikova. I always have trouble pronouncing the Russian names. But if you look up Rima and you look up the fact she's the undeniable escort of Oswald there. While doing that, he says, I want to become a Soviet citizen. I want to go through the process of staying here in the Soviet Union. I love it here because I just have an appreciation for the Soviet people. The KGB interviews him and decides that he has no need to stay there. The KGB agents, according to their own memoirs, and according to multiple memoirs of individuals who were present that day, state that they essentially told him that he had a silly belief about the realities of living in the Soviet Union, and that he was dreaming basically if he thought that this was going to be better for him here than there. And sent him back to his hotel room and denied his request and gave him 24 hours to leave the country. Now, after this, Oswald, according to all records again, slashed one of his wrists in what is generally explained in the mainstream as a suicide attempt, but seems to be more of a hysterical gesture because he didn't do any really serious damage. But he did cut himself badly enough that they had to put him in the hospital and delay his departure. And For political reasons, again, the USSR did not want to have an American citizen die on their soil and then have to explain it to the United States government. So this is all very sensible so far, isn't it?
And so far, but
except that Oswald is crazy, right? Of course. But here's the thing: while he's in the hospital and they patch him up and they take care of him, they tell him, "Look, we're going to let you stay here. We'll just let you stay here. Just don't do this again. And when you're better, we're going to move you somewhere, and you can stay for a while, temporarily."
Okay? Of course.
Now, there's more to this story because there's a whole scene where he goes into the U.S. Embassy or consulate and actually declares that he wants to renounce his American citizenship, which, the individual who actually took his passport from him states that he pretty much threw it in a drawer and left it there for 2 years and didn't bother to go through the process of taking this American-hating guy in the climate of the Cold War. I mean, intense Red Scare Cold War era, because this is 1959. Okay, in 1959, as I said, because Oswald died at 24, you're talking about a 19-year-old kid. All right. So
wait, he died in 63, so wouldn't he be 20 at this point?
In 59, no, he'd be 19 still.
Okay, he died at 24. He
turned 24 in October.
Okay, I'm with you.
No problem. It's easy to get confused, and I'm really trying to crush this down. I mean, I'm not giving you all the details. I'm just giving you a basic way to follow the story. But yeah, despite all that scene and everything else, I mean, normally if somebody even wanted to praise the Russian people or whatever, they would remove, you want to stay here, good, okay, so disqualify him from ever returning. If you renounce your citizenship, surrender your passport, the American government will no longer protect you, will no longer do anything for you if you've done this of your own free will. This is still commonly done. I mean, if you wanted to go to Saudi Arabia right now and declare yourself a Saudi Arabian citizen, I doubt the Saudis would take you. But if you did that in an American embassy, they would definitely show you the door and keep your passport and probably put you on a terrorist list. Okay? And believe me, it was more intense to be a communist at that time than it is now to be a terrorist of any kind. Okay? So that's a whole other ridiculousness. So he throws it in there. Okay? He throws it in his desk drawer and never goes through the process of disqualifying this kid from ever returning. Doesn't take him serious. Okay?
It's a miracle they let him back in.
Yeah, right. So here's the fun part of all this. They move him to an area which is called Belarus, okay, and in the city of Minsk. All right? Which is far off the beaten track. It's far enough away from Moscow so that he can't really cause any serious trouble. And they give him a job in a radio factory. They give him an apartment which is better than average. They give him more money than his own supervisor is being paid. They give him a lot of things and make him nice and comfortable because they suspect he's a spy, but they put him sort of out of the way of anything major. However, he doesn't behave like a spy. They're watching him from so many different angles, and like I said, I've discussed with, and here's where that interview comes up, I've discussed with Ernst Titovitz, okay, who's a doctor now, was a medical student at that time, and was going to the university nearby there, but was very fascinated with the English language. So the fact that there was a native-born American speaker in his neighborhood meant that Ernst Titovitz wanted to meet this guy. But almost everybody, and I've talked to others over there, who encountered Oswald, were all prepped and briefed or debriefed, depending on the day, by the KGB constantly because they wanted to know his every move, his every thought, his every interaction, what he was doing at all times. And of course the apartment was bugged and watched and surveilled from distances, from up close, you name it. Mm. Okay? But the guy doesn't behave like a spy.
They go, from what you were saying, they goad him to do things, but he still doesn't.
apparently they, because some of the technology which the Russians had, and they introduced it to him because they, since he was familiar with the operations and some of the hardware involved in radio broadcasting, they gave him a job in a radio/television factory there in the Soviet Union.
Hmm.
So when they did that, they also tried to introduce to him the ideas of some other technologies, even whether they were legitimate, remotely legitimate, whether they were stuff that the Americans didn't know about, but they didn't care if we discovered. They tried to bait him with that, with knowledge, with intrigues, like you can go and meet somebody who's not very happy with the Communist Party, but has a lot of knowledge, and he didn't really go for the bait. He was a whole lot more interested in meeting girls, drinking a little, going to a couple
typical
of
teenager.
Yeah, well, he's 19, when he gets there, and then turns 20 during that year. During the first year, he turns 20 because he arrived there in 59. But here's the thing. So he's there for 2 years. 2 years.
Till 61?
Till very early 62. Yeah. So the thing is this. He then, I believe
right.
Well, anyway, let's just put it this way. This is kind of interesting here. And I brought this up before. People usually don't hear this other places. But he met a woman named Ella German, or German, depending on how you pronounce it, but it looks like German, the word. And really wanted to fall for her and was kind of chasing after her for a while. She didn't take him very seriously, didn't think he was, there was very much to him, and probably was encouraged to stick by because he was fascinated by her by the KGB controllers at the time. And he asked her to marry him very shortly before asking Marina to marry him, which was only about a month later. So his legitimate interest in women was kind of strange, and there's a whole story to the introduction to Marina, who became his wife. Now, why do I bring up Marina at all? Because in 1961, he begins trying to apply to come back to the United States through the Russian government.
And he gets in, doesn't he?
And, well, not only does he get in, he goes back to the U.S. consulate after some time, and is married now, has one child, which I believe was June 1st. Yeah, June was the first child. Has one child by then, has a Russian wife, and gets to the American embassy, and pretty much that guy who I told you threw his passport in the drawer hands it back to him. Now, not only is he allowed to return to the United States without any sort of penalty, despite the fact that there are accounts that he swore up and down that he was going to give up radar secrets about the U-2 spy plane to the Russians. Not only that, but they actually lend him the money to travel home. The U.S. State Department, and this is not denied even in the official records, you can find the receipt for it in the Warren Commission volumes, that the U.S. State Department lent him something like $800 to be able to get him, Marina, and the baby back to the United States. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that, in and of itself, is kind of strange, in my opinion, because, like I said, the people that controlled the incoming and outgoing individuals, if you traveled to a strange country and seemed as though you might be a dangerous asset returning, there were plenty of people that were in charge of those types of decisions in the State Department that would have normally denied people for coming back for much, much less. And this guy's allowed to bring a half-Russian baby and a Russian wife and his own, supposedly treasonous, defective person back to the United States. So there is your first little glimpse into what's wrong here. So, returning back to the United States, it is only within, well, let's see now. From 1962 till, because in 1963 we're talking about nearly the end of 63 when the assassination occurs. A lot of little interesting things go on there where he spends time both in New Orleans and in Texas. And he gets himself involved in some very strange situations, including the very famous, confrontation in public with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee leaflets that he was handing out, which seemed to be pro-Castro at the time. Gets himself involved in a street scuffle with anti-Castro Cubans. Ends up that 3 people are arrested, the only one fined, which he was fined $10 for disorderly conduct in New Orleans, was Oswald. And what that did is get himself on a radio station and a television station, debating with anti-Castro Cubans over the wondrous greatness of the new Cuban people and how they should be left alone by the United States. This now puts him on the public record, gives a good recording of good old Commie Oswald. So that was useful, especially because Ed Butler and the other individual who were involved in these interviews, actually we later learned their entire broadcasting projects were generally being supported by the Central Intelligence Agency at that time. And that's stuff that we didn't learn about until the mid-90s, to be honest with you. So, we go a little further here, and in short order, Marina moves to Irving, Texas, and Oswald ends up in a suburb of Dallas. And he is not living with his wife at that time, although while she is living with their friend Ruth Payne, she does give birth to their second child. And Oswald, living alone in a rooming house, gets himself magically a job right on the route, shortly before Kennedy's visit is going to happen in that city. And he's in the school book depository, helping to move around boxes of books and being an order filler, at minimum wage as a sort of a temp employee in that business. And happens to be, like I said, at a nice elevated position, according to the official record, at exactly the time that President John F. Kennedy's motorcade makes an odd diversion right under a window he's working at. But that's another further story, isn't it? Then, after that day, there's a lot of problems with the official story as to the proof for him being on the 6th floor, the ability for him to have used that weapon to pull off the performance they claim, the ability for him to have escaped. The most interesting part of that to me is that even though, according to the official record, he owns a pistol and a rifle, he doesn't take the pistol with him, and he's going to he does bring a disassembled rifle, which he never bothers to sight in when he puts it together in the school book depository, mind you. But he doesn't bring the pistol with him. No, he leaves work out the front door, goes and catches a bus, and then gets frustrated waiting on the bus, asks for a transfer, goes and gets a taxi after offering it to another woman who was waiting at a taxi stand, and then takes his taxi to his, a little bit past his rooming house, walks on foot back to his rooming house. This is the official story again. Walks on foot back to his rooming house, goes and changes his jacket, picks up his revolver, runs out the door, goes on his way to the Texas movie theater and kills Officer J.D. Tippit, and then goes to the movies, where a suspicious ticket taker who didn't even realize herself that Oswald had gotten into the theater without paying for his ticket, a shoe salesman who thought he was behaving strangely at his window down the street, followed him to the theater and stated to the ticket taker that that guy didn't pay for a ticket, call the cops. And the next thing we know is the whole harrowing incident where in a theater where the movie War is Hell is playing, Oswald is dragged out, he stands up, takes a swing at a cop, supposedly pulls his .38, and they wrestle him to the ground, take him into custody, and they take him out the front door, and this entire scene is actually photographed and memorialized by many individuals, because by this time a crowd had joined outside, and all of this is in less than 90 minutes from the time of the assassination.
Okay.
So that is some amazing police work by the Dallas Police Department, if you ask me.
I'm sorry, you got cut off on my end. How long did it take?
Well, it took less than 90 minutes for him to be from the time that the JFK's head is exploding to the time that, yeah, less than 90 minutes, I'll give it that. From the time the JFK's head is exploding to the time that Oswald arrives at Dallas Police Headquarters in cuffs, looking a little beat up, happened.
Well, I had read a report, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but I read a report that said it happened, that he was in custody within 2 minutes, within less than 5 minutes.
That's absolutely inaccurate.
Okay.
Because as I stated to you, the whole reason why this timeline was built with him being on a bus and him getting a cab and then him having to walk an entire mile, which he had to cover a little more than a mile in 7 minutes, by the way, for the for this timeline to even work.
Wait,
when he was taken into custody.
Wasn't there a witness that said he was walking, not running?
The witnesses are all sorts of in all different directions.
Oh, I know. I read a bunch of witness accounts.
The only one that that claims that they actually saw the Tippit shooting from beginning to end was Helen Markham, although she covered her eyes when Oswald started to walk away from the scene, she says. Even though she could not accurately describe the clothes he was wearing, and completely, if you read
was she the one that was nearsighted?
No, there we're talking about Howard Brennan.
Oh, him. He's been cited a lot.
Yeah, well, Howard Brennan actually is a witness in Dealey Plaza who claims to look up from the ground, across the street, from the ground, up at the 6th floor window, and be able to not only describe Oswald's hair color, but his build, his height, his weight, and his age at approximately 30.
How do you tell his weight from looking at him?
Right, a half-open window, 6 floors up, when you're
across
not
the
wearing
street.
your glasses across the street. Yeah,
and you're nearsighted.
Right. Good luck with that. Not to mention the fact that his job in and of itself, the guy was a welder. So his job in and of itself was sort of detrimental to his eyesight as a constant anyway, because he had light sensitivity problems because of the fact that he was constantly having to wear, protection so you don't stare at the arc of the welding. This is common knowledge. But,
obviously not. If we're having to explain it.
But the hysterical thing is he's the star witness for the shooting. He's the only guy who says that he saw him with the gun, pulling it back into the whole bit.
Yep.
The whole bit. He's the star witness.
Nearsighted from across the street, 6 floors up, without his glasses.
Right, and can tell you the weight of a guy standing in a half-open window. A half-open, dirty window, too.
Incredible.
Yeah, well, I'm amazed. I don't know about you, but I'm quite amazed.
Honestly, there's nothing to say he couldn't, but there's overwhelming evidence that it's highly unlikely.
It's in the realm of reasonable doubt, that's for sure.
It's well beyond reasonable doubt.
And what has made it even worse is, as I said, then they paraded him out for the media. Like I said, he was captured in the early afternoon, and the media was able to capture him in the hallways here and there, making statements, yelling things out.
Do you have any idea when they got him?
When they got him?
Yeah, when they talked with him.
When who talked with him?
The investigators, the media.
Well, the media weren't investigating it. They were just present at Dallas Police.
Right, I know. I'm talking about both of them. When did they get to speak with Howard Brennan?
Oh, Howard Brennan?
Yes.
He was tracked down by Dallas police officers while still standing in Dealey Plaza to give them a description, which they gave a few minutes later on the radio. You can listen to that stuff if you want. You can find it on.
Do you know specifically what time they spoke with him? Or in chronology to the actual shooting?
There's a serious bone of contention about the amount of time it takes because Dallas police recordings, they were recorded on dictabelt machines, and on the dictabelt machine, if it's voice actuated. So in order to save recording space, so real time on a Dallas dictabelt recording is not real time. There's a distortion there, so
So
it's
you really
generally
can't be sure.
no, but it's generally accepted that within 20 minutes they had that description on the air. I mean, official stories and researchers both agree that within 20 minutes, and some of them say much less.
I heard a guy saying like 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
I'm not ruling it out. This is an insane case anyway.
Oh yeah, the whole thing has holes in it from start to finish, and that's part of my point. You know, like I said, the media, okay, the cops take him into custody. They don't bother to put a stenographer in the room to record it. They don't have, and tape recorders were available to police at that time, especially in a decent-sized city. Let's call it a decent-sized city in Texas. They had the ability to record. They had the ability to take notes, and no notes of any consequence actually exist. Now, recently, people discovered that there were notes taken by the lead investigator, but they're very convoluted. They're like little jots to remind him of certain things, and they're inconclusive at best. And they're the only notes that were taken by any official at that time was a postal inspector named Holmes, who actually came in because he doubled as an FBI agent. Thank you very much. He went in and took fairly extensive notes of the interrogation that he was part of, which was not the entire interrogation.
I wonder why they wouldn't have brought him in for the whole thing.
Why they wouldn't have brought him in for the whole thing? Because the FBI had no jurisdiction over this case.
Well, they obviously did better than the people actually investigating it.
Well, you would think so, but we've left something out here too in the chronology, and that is that that motorcycle officer Marion Baker, who was part of the motorcade, ran into the book depository 90 maximum, okay, like within seconds of the, well, let's put it this way, within seconds of the shots, Marion Baker stopped his motorcycle, parked it, and ran into the book depository with a gun drawn, and found himself the boss immediately. The boss started accompanying him on a search. They were running from floor to floor trying to find a shooter. Now, meanwhile, there are other cops running up the grassy knoll, most of them running up the grassy knoll. Okay, other motorcycle cops like Joe Marshall Smith and a couple of others were up there. Within a few minutes, there were sheriff's deputies and others searching the railroad yard behind the picket fence. But Marion Baker is most famous for having run into the book depository because within 90 seconds, he's got a gun pointed at Oswald on the second floor. Okay? 1 minute and 1/2 minute later, from the time of the shots,
It's a joke.
he's got a gun pointing at Oswald, who's standing there with a bottle of soda in his hand.
It's a joke that people even believe it.
Well, I'd love to know how it is he got down 4 flights of steps, appeared completely calm, although slightly maybe startled because the cop had a gun drawn on him.
I think we both would be startled if we were just holding a soda and we had a gun pointed at us.
Right, and outside of that, you might go, oh, a little quick flinch. That's about all he did. And the boss, Mr. Truly, said, no, this is the man works here. Because Baker famously screams out, is he an employee? Do you know this man? He said, yes, he works here. And Oswald continues drinking his soda. There is a whole big problem with this, with Marion Baker's story, though, and I'll tell you why. And that is that Marion Baker went back to the headquarters at Dallas PD, was in the same room, practically right next to Oswald, trying to type out his report, and gives an identifying description of the man that he pointed a gun at on the second floor, and explains his whole situation, and doesn't even mention the fact that the suspect is in custody and a few feet away from him. Okay, so there's something wrong there as well. But and also in his handwritten notes, the bottle of soda appears. In his typewritten account, it doesn't. And it appears again and disappears again when he's giving testimony before the Warren Commission, by the way. But that's a whole other area. But the bad part here, though, is that Oswald makes it down 4 floors perfectly calm after supposedly squeezing off 3 rounds from a bolt-action rifle. He has just blown the brains out of the President of the United States, according to their story, and he's perfectly calm, drinking a soda.
After getting down 4 flights of stairs in a minute and a half.
Yeah, and the other problem is that that there were at least 2 secretaries intervening on those steps at exactly the time Oswald would have to go down those steps, and they never saw him. So we have an awfully interesting way that he got down those steps. Now, I went through this with a couple of different witnesses that were there that day, and because there was an elevator in the building, and I thought to myself, maybe, just possibly, he was able to use a freight elevator to get down there. But there's a problem with that, and that is that just about every witness, except for the one who had a serious felony record.
And was the nearsighted one involved after that, or was he just...
Oh, no, Brennan was outside of the building. He was never in the building. So I'm talking about stuff that went on in the building.
I didn't know where he was specifically after the fact.
Wandering around Dealey Plaza for a little bit.
Okay, I thought he was inside the building.
No, that's where the cops got him. The cops, were, pouncing on people, trying to figure out, because a lot of people hit the deck because of the, the gunshots being fired. And all that. So, I mean, police were approaching them. They were drawing guns. They were searching for people. There was accounts of puffs of smoke. There was accounts of suspicious people being in suspicious places and having disappeared. The search of the railroad yard, the parking lot in front of the railroad yard is interesting. And this is where they discovered and stopped a train, and you have the whole 3 tramps story. Which I think is one of those distractions that has nothing to do with the reality of the case. But all of these things are happening, live action, while the limo is speeding to Parkland Hospital. So the thing is this, with the Baker story, not only did he have to get down those 4 floors. Oh, the elevator, right? I was explaining that. The elevator was stuck on the 4th floor anyway. And I mean to tell you that people that totally disagree with whether Oswald was guilty, whether Oswald was a lunatic, and everything else, they all can agree that the elevator was stuck because somebody forgot to send it back up.
You can say he was a lunatic, but facts are facts.
Yeah, that's the thing. So, but when you have people, a lot of times with this case, you find that over the years, even witnesses have begun to change their stories. Some of them state they're getting to be more honest. Some of them state that they've discovered new things about things that happened, and their stories change over time. But what I can tell you is that when you see a story that somebody gave in 1964, and you examine the story in 84 and 94, and they all seem to be exactly consistent with one another, you probably have somebody telling you the truth from their memory. When you see somebody altering and changing and sort of swinging with the time and the tides, this is when you encounter people that are probably being, influenced at the very least by the individuals that are asking the questions. And that's the government and the researchers. Both have tainted evidence by doing this. So when I say the elevator was stuck elsewhere, I've got multiple sources that are opposing forces even agreeing on this. So he wasn't able to use the elevator. He would have had to use the steps. And it's just virtually impossible in my mind for somebody to pull off those 3 shots, run across a warehouse floor with boxes and everything else in the way, stash a rifle, and get down 4 flights of steps without being seen or heard by anybody on those steps and appear calm when a cop pulls a gun on him.
Less than 2 minutes later.
90 seconds. 90 seconds.
It's absolutely incredible.
And if you want to see a funny explanation as to how it got done, I actually put up on my YouTube channel the official Secret Service reenactment of the crime and his escape. And
I'm gonna go watch that after the show.
It's pretty funny. because the removal of the obstacles, the removal of the problem with the elevator and everything else is so blatant that you can tell that they completely manipulated the entire scene to just make it fit. And also, again, the soda's not present. There is a timing problem. It's not like today where you can drop in a little bit of money into a soda machine, hit a button, and that's all you got to do. There was a little more to it in 1963, and you had to actually put the money in and drop it in there, and then you had to actually pull the soda out and pull the cap off. So,
And that would probably alone take 90 seconds.
that's what I'm thinking, but let's just say it took 30 seconds.
You would have to run down 4 flights of stairs.
He would have to run across a large warehouse floor with boxes all in his way, then stash the rifle after wiping his fingerprints off, because there were no prints found on the rifles outside at all. Okay, none usable until afterwards, by the way. That's a fascinating story. The local fingerprint guys tried to lift prints. The FBI demanded the evidence be sent to them over the weekend. It was sent to them. They could find no prints on the rifle. They sent it back. And when they sent it back, after Oswald is dead, the local fingerprint guy in Texas finds himself a smudged palm print. Isn't that fascinating enough? But let's just continue with the official story. He wipes off the rifle, stashes it really quickly between some boxes, then makes those 4 flights of steps and ends up in the second floor snack room completely calm. I have problems with that story.
There are more than one.
Absolutely. And meanwhile, believe me, the details are endless that you can discover about this. Just starting with the Warren Commission's accounts alone. And
There could be a show just on going through all the holes in that.
Oh yeah, definitely. There are people that have spent, like again, another 10 years, 20 years, just pulling that thing apart, because it's an 888-page report, and the report ostensibly is supported by the 26 volumes, that were released, which contain, I think the smallest one is like 300 pages, the largest one is like 700 pages, something like this.
I bet the smallest one isn't the one about the teeth.
Well, that's just one of the exhibits. I love that one because it's one of the greatest, and they were pointing this out in 1965 when they started doing presentations, public speeches on, the like moronic sort of aspects of the Warren Commission. It is absolutely true that in one of the exhibits, and I can't remember the volume off the top of my head, but I swear to you, if you do a search online, I'm sure you'll find it mentioned and cited, that there is a study of Jack Ruby's mother's teeth in one of the Warren Commission volumes. And I borrow this from Mark Lane. He absolutely was the first person to say this, and I love it, is that even if Jack Ruby had bitten Lee Harvey Oswald to death, I fail to see the relevance of the exhibit. And that's true.
Well, it just goes to show you, kind of like putting it in a modern context, putting it in a recent context, the coffee thing, the plant. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of it's using something insignificant to cover something significant.
Well, right, and that's what the beauty of it is. And so now we'll just continue on with the story a little bit.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt that.
Not a problem. Please interrupt, ask the questions all you want, because there's a ton of this stuff. So Oswald is in custody, right? Because as I told you, they took him into custody at the Texas Theater. I even told you one of the movies that was playing there that day. And this is photographed. It's memorialized. There were FBI agents present. As a matter of fact, there was only one guy who was actually present at like every single arrest and crime scene that there was, and he's a shady character in and of himself. But anyway, the guy is in custody now by, like, let's just say, let's be generous, by 2 p.m. Okay, so Kennedy is killed at about 12:30 local time. At 2 p.m. local time, Oswald is in custody. Now they begin interrogating him, and as they're shuffling him in and out of different rooms and things, he's making statements like, and this is a quote, "I have committed no acts of violence." Reporters are shouting at him, "Why did you shoot the president?" And he says, "I didn't shoot anybody. They have taken me in because of the fact that I have lived in the Soviet Union. I am just a patsy." This is the type of stuff this guy was saying, publicly shouting, and repeatedly throughout the course of the weekend, but especially on Friday, he was complaining that these police officers are not allowing me legal representation.
Which
Okay?
even people say if you're a criminal, you shouldn't get that. Yes, you should.
Everyone deserves legal representation under the United States Constitution.
Even a guy who
guarantees.
Even a guy who assassinates a president.
Which, by the way, was a local crime at that time. It was not even a federal crime to have shot the President of the United States. It was supposed to have been handled there, locally. Okay? There's a whole situation that occurs at Parkland Hospital where the Secret Service, by force, removes JFK's body from the jurisdiction in which he died, thus denying the local medical examiner the ability to examine the body post-mortem and do an autopsy to properly determine the cause of death, the manner by which Kennedy was killed, and everything else. The evidence here has been destroyed and covered up left and right and was taken completely out of the hands.
Well, that's what they do with any conspiracy. Just look at 9/11 and look how fast they hauled off the World Trade Center 7 stuff.
Oh yeah, but this is instantaneous. This is instantaneous.
No. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like they wanted us to know something.
Within the course of a couple of hours, Oswald is in custody. LBJ is being sworn in with the police chief present on Air Force One. You can see him there in the photographs. Okay. Kennedy's casket is loaded onto Air Force One, despite the fact, like I said, they absolutely violated the laws of Texas and Dallas County. There was no federal jurisdiction over this crime at that time. So they absconded with the body, they absconded with suspects, they absconded with the evidence. Even the car itself is taken immediately out of Texas.
Well,
okay?
what purpose would that serve?
Well, according to those that want to support the official story, it was the Kennedy family that absolutely wanted him removed from the state and brought back home so that he could be examined by people that actually cared, and they were in a known hostile city. There are others that assert that LBJ was afraid that it may be a larger conspiracy and he was also a target.
He obviously is now.
Well, I do believe that he was a target in his own mind for sure, and I do believe that he believed that without a question, because the next day he's on the phone with J. Edgar Hoover, and Hoover's giving him the account of the crime the way he understands it, and he's got a few things wrong, like he says Oswald was on the 5th floor instead of the 6th floor, etc., etc.
And instead of the 2nd floor.
Right, and completely gives a ridiculous account of the shooting sequence and all this other stuff. But, you know, LBJ literally says, were any of those bullets meant for me? I really have a hard time believing that this guy is making this statement on some tapes that he never expects the world will ever hear, okay, and is asking his good friend, the head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, were any of the shots meant for me? Okay?
It kind of throws him planning it out the window.
In my opinion as well. I think he was aware it was going to happen, but may have gotten really scared that maybe he was going to be killed as well. The Secret Service agent Rufus Youngblood is the guy who dove over top of LBJ. Thanks a lot. He was the human shield. So, you know, he assured the fact that once the shooting started, our vice president would survive. And that leads to some interesting stuff, because people like to talk about how there were Secret Service agents all over Dealey Plaza when they weren't there. That can actually be accounted for. There was Secret Service agent Lem Johnson, who recently passed away. actually leapt from the LBJ car and went running through Dealey Plaza with his book of identification exposed, trying to figure out what the hell was going on, and
As
encountered the
anyone would be in that situation.
well, there's a Secret Service agent actually reacting and attempting to do his job, much like
Well, you don't see many of them anymore.
no, and you didn't see him there either, except for Clint Hill. One of the little-known facts is that at the time the shooting started, the lead agent actually told all of the agents verbally within earshot of him to stay put, and that included the guys on the follow-up car who would have went running. Clint Hill went against the order, and Clint Hill was actually assigned to protect Jackie Kennedy, and did so by climbing onto the back of the car. As you see in a few films, you see a Secret Service agent struggling to get on the top of the car, Jackie coming out to the back trunk, and him getting over top of the car and then shielding both the president and Jackie with his body. But of course, this is long after the headshot has already occurred. Although Clint Hill had to be in motion to get onto the car by the time the headshot, when you look at the timing of the headshot, he started running toward the limousine before JFK's head exploded. So he was attempting to do his job, but he seems to be the only guy that was supposed to move that did move. The other two people that I can state unequivocally did their jobs, like I said, are Rufus Youngblood and Lem Johns. But the others and the majority of the agents that were on duty that day were hungover. And that's something that people have learned over the years, that they were drinking at a place called The Cellar, which was owned by a man named Kirkwood in Fort Worth the night before. They had actually left the local fireman in charge of guarding the floor that JFK was staying on in the Fort Worth Hotel, and gone and drank hard liquor until 4 a.m. with topless chicks serving them drinks all night, when they had a 7 a.m. wake-up call for the president. But yet another story, and I've now deviated off of the Oswald story a bit. Here's the thing.
It's fine. We're going to end up doing parts on all of it, so.
No problem. And you know what? This gives you a hint of exactly how screwed up this thing is. So Oswald, like I said, was in custody, and he's being shuffled in and out of doorways and being interrogated and brought to prison cells and this and that in the Justice Complex, or the City Hall there in Dallas, which you'll see scenes of crowded hallways and cameras trying to make their way in, and news reporters being shoved around in these group sort of feeding frenzies, where they're interviewing people like Jesse Curry, who was the chief of police at the time. Also happened to be the driver of the, well, no, I think he was in the Decker car, as they describe it on the motorcade, which was the pilot car for the motorcade at the time. Decker was the county sheriff of Dallas County at the time. So the county sheriff, you know, the head there of the sheriff's department, the chief of police are in a car with Wynn Lawson, who is the Secret Service agent in charge of the group of agents that were there, were all in the lead car at the time, which you do see on some films. It's one of the ones that has a top on it and all that. It's actually passed by the limousine on their rush to Parkland Hospital. So anyway, back to Oswald in the hallway. He's making these statements as he comes in and out. He says, you know, they're not allowing me a shower, they're not allowing me legal representation, all this stuff. So they keep shuffling him in and out and continue to interrogate him. At about 1:30 a.m., because meanwhile they're charging him first for the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit. They did that during the afternoon. I'm not sure the exact time off the top of my head. But at 1:30 in the morning, he is officially charged with the assassination and the murder of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. They actually wake up a judge, haul him into a proceeding, tell him that he's being charged. He asks, they ask him if he understands the charges which have been leveled against him, and his only comment is, "This is ridiculous." And they haul him out. Now, just previous to that, which is very famous now at this point, is what they call the midnight press conference. This is the most famous piece of Oswald. Oswald filmed with him in custody outside of the one where Jack Ruby kills him. This is the one where he stands there and takes a few questions. And They say to him, now here's the interesting thing, I just told you they charged him at 1:30 officially, but they had already told the media that he was being charged. So he states in that press conference, and this is how you can know which one I'm talking about, he states during that press conference where people are trying to ask him questions about various things, they say, you know, did you shoot the president? He says, no, I didn't do that. I haven't been charged with that. I know I've been charged with shooting a policeman. And the reporters tell him that you have been charged. And he sort of makes a face, and that's the end of the press conference. They drag him away. With a phalanx of police officers on all sides of him, by the way, he's well protected at the press conference.
But strangely enough, not when he's walking down the hall and gets shot.
Nope, but an interesting spectator at that press conference at that time was Jack Ruby. He's actually captured on film in the back of the place observing the midnight press conference. And in fact, Ruby is present and filmed by CBS, NBC, and ABC all throughout the weekend, all before he shoots Lee Harvey Oswald on Sunday morning. So his interrogation continues, all right? And like I said, you know, Postal Inspector Holmes comes in, and they continue this for about 48 hours without making a recording, without using a stenographer, okay, not keeping any sort of reliable records outside of the notes of Postal Inspector Holmes. FBI agents are brought in. James Hosty is brought in, who was the FBI agent assigned to following this guy Oswald beforehand, and everything else. And there's a whole lot of interesting stories about that.
Do you believe Oswald's completely innocent?
I can say this. I don't believe that the man fired a single shot that day. As far as his innocence, that's a nexus of problems.
Well, I mean his innocence in that sort of context.
In the context of, did he actually shoot our 35th president? I believe.
Or the police officer.
The police officer is a little bit weirder of a case than even the JFK situation because of the contradictory witnesses and everything else. I believe it is possible that he shot J.D. Tippit. I don't
know why he would.
Well, here's the thing. If you imagine that he is aware of some of the goings-on and is somewhat involved with, you know, rather shaky and shadowy characters, and, you know, has been told that something is going to happen, like, let's just say, for instance, we're going to take shots at the motorcade to encourage the president. You know, we're going to take shots at the motorcade, pin it on a Castro sympathizer, and encourage John F. Kennedy to want to invade Cuba, and you're going to be part of this operation. Take this crappy gun and fire it out into a field, let's just say, because there were other bullet strikes besides the ones that hit JFK and John Connally. Okay? Because he was also being charged with the attempted murder of the governor of Texas, John Connally, as well.
Well, there were, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, there were 3 shots fired. The one that missed, the kill shot, and the magic bullet.
This is the official explanation. And the only reason they had to come up with the missed shot, by the way, because initially the FBI had said that there were 3 shots, 1 to Kennedy, 1 to Connally, 1 more to Kennedy. When they discovered that bystander James Tague had been struck in the face with either fragments of cement or bullet fragments, okay, and had been cut on the face at a distance and in a position that made no sense, along with the bullet strikes in the car, they actually had to figure out a way for 1 bullet to have passed through Kennedy and Connally at the same time. Thus, the single bullet theory was born.
Or the magic. The magic bullet theory.
The magic bullet. I hesitate to call it the magic bullet for one reason. Although it is a slim and ridiculous possibility, from a strictly physical point of view, it is vaguely possible
Oh,
That one bullet could have passed through the neck of Kennedy and entered Connolly and done the type of damage they're talking about.
can I counter that?
Absolutely, go ahead.
It's completely, your point is true, but not with the weapon or the bullets he had.
Well, there is your problem. Actually, the bullets do lend themselves to the possibility.
Right, maybe, but
the weapon is an absolute atrocity.
It's quite
right.
You can basically call it the crap rifle.
Oh yeah, it is absolutely one of the most ridiculous weapons that could even be conceivably used for anything regarding accuracy when shooting at anything.
Let alone a moving target.
Oh right, not to mention the fact that there was a 4-power scope on the thing that was, had a defect in it. The gun itself, according to the government's, entire story, is that he brought it in there partially disassembled, so he reassembled it without the benefit of even a screwdriver, because the government said all you needed was a dime to be able to use the flathead screws to reassemble the thing. But he did this without sighting in the rifle, without test firing it, or anything else.
Not to mention how bad a shot he was, how bad the weapon was.
But listen, even if you just say that he got lucky and he had a pretty decent, weapon, his vantage point is no good. He's shooting through a half-open window. Nobody can contest that. And the explanation when you explain to them that if you use that scope and attempt to use that weapon in the condition it was in, it was not accurate, even close to accurate, it sort of explains the James Tague strike. If somebody popped one round from the 6th floor, that first of all changes the timeline.
And doesn't, correct me if I'm wrong again, I could completely be wrong.
No problem.
But wouldn't the weapon that he used push him back?
There's a fair kick to it, but it's not the most powerful.
Right, but they said he got 3 and 6 seconds. Correct? They said 3 and 6 seconds.
Right, and they've even tried to spread it out to 8 seconds to explain things a little better.
8 seconds is still a stretch.
Right, and realistically, whether you were using a scope or you were using the iron sights, which a lot of the lone nut theorists like to go to, if you're utilizing the iron sights on a rifle like that, the problem with having to recycle the rifle, I've seen demonstrations on this where they show 3 shots being made in 4 seconds and in 5 seconds by marksmen who are, bracing themselves with very little else, anything better than what Oswald had to brace the rifle with and all that. And I understand this. But when you take the angle, the obstruction of the tree, the moving target, although it was not moving laterally, it was only moving,
horizontally.
Let's put it this way. If you imagine things in a 2-dimensional plane, a moving target which is moving side to side creates a whole lot more of a problem for training your target with a rifle.
There's too many variables saying he couldn't have done it.
There's so many reasonable ways to make it next to impossible for him to have done it. Is it physically feasible?
Yes.
It actually is.
It's feasible, but the thing that throws feasibility out the window for me, and this might be different for you or for anyone else, is his skill.
See, that is a good contention, not a bad one at all.
His skill is
if you just
terrible.
take the condition of the weapon combined with his skill, combined with his opportunity, okay, and then combined with the buried and redacted evidence.
And then the time it took.
See, because the buried and redacted evidence, and the evidence which they had to form the single bullet theory around, is the Tague strike on the curb. So let's just assume, let's just try to argue on their point for a second, okay?
Sure.
And say that a fragment of the bullet which had, ejected itself from Kennedy's head had struck the curb, and only a fragment of that bullet caused the wound to James Tague.
And that's actually possible.
Let's just say, okay, but we're, listen, we're trying to do what Jim Garrison used to say about tying an elephant's tail to a daisy and letting them hang off the cliff here, but it is feasible in the right settings. Okay.
And with the right time, with the right person.
Yeah, but here's the problem. There is a little-known bullet strike on the turf on the opposite side of the street from the grassy knoll that everybody always forgets about, and it is right there in the testimony of the Warren Commission. There is a let me think about this for a second. There's a video series by a guy named Mark Oakes, okay, who did 2 videos called Real JFK Witnesses. He interviewed them in the 90s. He was a Texas-based researcher who actually did some work with me a couple of times on a few things, and he interviewed this husband and wife who were present and saw the strike on the turf and hit the manhole cover across the street. Their testimony to the Warren Commission is a matter of the official record, and he interviewed them again. He also did a video called On the Trail of the Mystery FBI Man, because there are photographs taken by 2 photojournalists who happened to be present that day. One of them is named Tom Dillard, and he photographed an individual picking up what appears to be a slug from the grass on the opposite side of the street from the grassy knoll. Okay? This is photographic evidence you can find yourself if you search for it. It is also, and if you want to hear something funny about it, the first place that this photograph ever appeared in the public's mind, okay, there was two instances. There was one picture of the slug in the grass, which appeared in a Fort Worth newspaper over the course of the weekend, which has since been absolutely ignored by anybody, it seems. But also, the first place that it was publicly readily available, Police Chief Jesse Curry released a book in 1969 called Jesse Curry's Official Police File on the JFK Assassination. It was only available in Southland Corporation stores because at that time Jesse Curry had gotten himself a nice cushy job being the head of security for 7-Eleven stores. So only available in 7-Eleven stores was this very short, thin little book in 1969, which is hard to find now, but I'm sure you can find the photographs being shown to you online from that book of this guy picking up that slug out of the grass. Okay? And this was being done. You can line up the time real easily because there is a giant digital clock on the roof of the book depository building in the background of the photograph. This is happening very shortly after the shots are fired in Dealey Plaza. There is no official account of where that bullet came from. There is no official account as to how it got there. It is completely dismissed. Okay? So if you assume that Oswald got 3 shots according to the official record, now the new official record, because the first FBI report, okay, which was in 5 volumes, it sounds intimidating, but it's only about 300 pages. In the first FBI report, it was 1 shot to Kennedy, 1 shot to Connolly, headshot to Kennedy, end of story, because they could only account for 3 bullets having come from the Mannlicher Carcano. There were 3 expended shells found. They manipulated and found enough witnesses to say that they heard 3 booms, which if you watch in minutes after the assassination, if you watch CBS not being able to even turn on their camera yet because it needed to warm up, you can hear Walter Cronkite even stating that there were 3 bursts of gunfire. Okay? Bursts of gunfire, possibly from automatic weapons. There was a lot of echo and everything else in Dealey Plaza. I'm not going to get into the arguments on the ear witnesses because that'll take me all day. But here's the thing. If you even examine that and you accept that they had the 3 shots, 1 to Kennedy, 1 to Connolly, 1 to Kennedy, then upon the discovery of James Tague being struck in the face, they needed to remove 1 bullet from the scenario. So it became 1 to Kennedy, which passed through him and hit Connolly, and 1 to Kennedy with 1 missed shot.
Yeah, it's...
But now, if you just assume, and go ahead and search, you will find it, and you'll even find the witnesses. There's video of it also in a documentary called, oh boy, it's 6 hours long, and it's called No, it's 6 hours long. It actually covers the JFK, the Oswald death, RFK's death, MK Ultra, and MLK's death. And
it covers all of them?
It covers all of them in a 6 hour long thing, and it's mainly just the news clips and different clips of documentaries strung together, basically. And this guy was trying to get it, distributed on a wide basis for a long time, but it never got out there. And it's an interesting documentary. But you can find the testimony of these people explaining it, and if you don't want to go there, go ahead to the Warren Commission and see if you can find the the testimony of at least 2 witnesses. There's actually more witnesses to it, but 2 witnesses, that were a husband and wife that claimed that they saw this strike on the turf. There's also witnesses who claim that the street was hit because there were sparks that flew up next to the car. There is witnesses that say that there were bullets in all different places. But we are left with, at this point in time, 3 shots because they could only find 3 expended shells from the Mannlicher Carcano, they stated. And at one point, by the way, in the official record, if you check with the Dallas Police Archives, there's actually only 2 shells.
So where did the 3rd one they made up come from?
I have wondered that quite often myself. I really have.
It's amazing that they get away with this, honestly.
Yeah, well, that's the way I see it. You can see what people have told me was a reenactment of the search of the 6th floor in a film by a guy named Tom Ollier, who famously was a news reporter, a news cameraman, who was in there during the search of the 6th floor when the discovery of the rifle happened. It was picked up and everything else, and this guy had to throw his reel of film out the window to somebody waiting on the ground to catch the sucker in order to get it out of the building. Okay, and it was broadcast, I believe, on the NBC affiliate first. It might have been CBS, but check it out. Allier, A-L-Y-E-A. Tom Allier was the cameraman for that one. But anyways, all this stuff is happening, and we still haven't gotten to the death of Lee Harvey Oswald, have we?
No, we're going to have to do multiple parts.
Well, you know what? We're not that deep yet. We're getting close to your time here, but I'm going to tell you what. Let's continue on with the weekend, okay?
There's a lot there, apparently.
Sure is. Now, here's an amazing story. Now, when we go through, okay, I told you what happened late Friday night, right? So by this time, on Saturday, we now have, well, actually earlier than that, but believe me, there's plenty of stuff to be seen, and if you can get your hands on the 72 hours or so of news footage which continuously ran from any of the networks that weekend, please do. I have some of it up on my YouTube page, which you can find. If you just look for me on YouTube, you just go blind JFK, and you'll find me. There's various pieces of this film that I put up there. There's other individuals who probably have every bit of it up there as well. You can find it if you look for it. But here's the deal. During the course of this weekend, and I'm capsulizing this because, as I said, the cameras were running for the entire weekend. I mean, all the way up to and including the funerals of Oswald and Kennedy on Monday, and everything else. You know, you have news cameras running. Okay, reactions, the him laying in state in the Capitol. The horse-drawn carriage with the riderless horse who is accompanying the funeral procession. Jackie Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy walking. All of these images are iconic. JFK Jr. saluting his father as the casket passes. All of these things are going on live television. So during the coverage of things on the night shift, so to speak, on Saturday, you have District Attorney Henry Wade, who comes out and makes a whole lot of statements, including the now completely debunkable fact that Oswald's paraffin test was positive. His paraffin test, I can tell you if you break down the way it was conducted. For those who don't know, by the way, this is the old standard for gunshot residue tests, where they actually cover an individual's hand or body part, depending, maybe your face, which they did on Oswald's face and hands, a residue test by using paraffin wax to extract from the skin the spent bits of carbon, actually, from the gases that are emitted when you create a charge in a chamber of a gun, which lays these little bits of particulate on somebody's skin. Now, there are various elements in that, one of them having been antimony. These things are all involved in the firing of a gun. You know, I mean, it's not just gunpowder residue, as most people believe. There is some of that involved, depending on the weapon. But really, it is the gases from the discharge which deposit themselves on a shooter's hands, most commonly on their hands, their arms, and when you're using a rifle and holding it up and sighting it, especially with a weapon which does not have a very secure chamber like a Manlick or Carcano, you can easily expect that gunshot residue will be deposited on somebody's face. So, Henry Wade and Jesse Curry both state, in fact, that Oswald's gunshot residue tests are positive. Well, they're only half lying. They are partially positive for the fact that he has antimony present on his hands. The palms of his hands, mainly. This is completely inconsistent with the idea that he would have fired a rifle or a revolver that day. Okay? Not only that, but the tests on his face are negative. You can see this if you go to Dallas police archives online. I'm pretty sure they still have the paraffin test online there. If not, you can find it in the Warren Commission volumes. The evidence is there for it, and it's right there in black and white in the typewritten description of the report that it is positive on the palms of his hands. It is not positive on his face, and it is not positive on the outsides of his hands, which you would totally expect to be covered in this crap if he had fired a rifle or a pistol that day. Okay, so during this time, District Attorney D.A. Wade, which, you know, just a little more of a sidetrack real quickly, you know the Roe versus Wade case? Yeah, that's the same Henry Wade. Okay, District Attorney Henry Wade states a few interesting facts on Saturday. And one of those interesting facts is that because they're starting to talk about a communist conspiracy in the media, and that Oswald had clearly had communist relation to some organizations, things like this, it's very disputable as to how these facts started to leak and exactly what they were linked to. But the idea that he had a Russian-born wife and the idea that he had spent time in the Soviet Union was a matter of public record, because there were a few news articles and there were those radio debates which I told you about, where his biography was sort of published in local media in New Orleans before this anyway. So they're questioning Henry Wade about that, and they ask him specifically, is he part of the Free Cuba movement? And well, no, they ask him, is he part of any other organization? And Henry Wade actually says he's part. I think he's part of the Free Cuba Union, Free Cuba movement, something like that. Now, there was at that time a Free Cuba movement, but immediately from the crowd of reporters and individuals present, there are at least two voices that I can hear piping up, immediately explaining, no, that's the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Okay? Do you know who it was that was at least one of those voices saying that?
No.
Dylan? One of those voices was literally Jack Ruby, present at the D.A. Wade conference, correcting Wade about his facts on Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay? Now, the Warren Commission also found that Jack Ruby had no part of any conspiracy. He was also another lone nut who just decided to do what he decided to do. Okay? But meanwhile, he knows this pretty interesting sort of, you know, random factoid about this kid Oswald who's nobody. And people contend to this day that Jack Ruby did not know Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, I don't know, maybe I'm not the most brilliant human being in the world, but that sort of suggests to me that he had to know something about the guy in order to be correcting D.A. Wade at a conference in front of, you know, 50, 60, 80, 100 reporters. But, you know, I'm a conspiracy theorist, right?
Yeah, if you believe that physics is accurate, you're a nut job, just like the rest of us.
Well, you know, after all, I've seen videos that can explain that the Easter Bunny might have done this while he was hanging upside down from by his toes from a UFO, but I'm not buying it. So, you know, if you want to sell that, that's cool. Go ahead, but I'm not buying it. So anyway, as I said, now we're going through Saturday here, right? So Kennedy's laying in state. There's a whole sort of, you know, thing that goes on with his autopsy until, you know, at least 4 a.m. on Saturday morning. This in and of itself, we could do 2 hours on just the autopsy without an effort.
We could.
But we're not going to do that today.
No, not today.
But in the meantime, I'm just giving you the sort of context of what's happening. The news is running 24 hours. This is what's happening in the world. This is what's going down, okay? Oswald is still in custody. He's been charged. He has now been interrogated. Nobody's keeping records. Okay, fine. They announced to the media on Saturday night that they will be moving Lee Harvey Oswald on Sunday morning. They're going to move him from his cell at the Dallas Police Headquarters to the county jail, which is only like right down the street. They decide that they're going to bring in an armored car. They have difficulty bringing that in because they want to protect him, because there are plenty of people in Dallas that are pissed now because they blame this guy for having done it. He's clearly the guilty guy, and they want to take him out in the street and lynch him. This is what the cops say anyway. But meanwhile, there's a whole fascinating exchange. You can find Jim Lavelle, who is one of the individuals. When you're looking at the picture of Oswald being led out, you know, as the lamb to slaughter there in the basement of the of City Hall, okay, one of the guys cuffed to him, most famously recognizable because of the very tall white Stetson and the look on his face at the time Ruby pumps a shot into Oswald's gut, is James Lavelle. You can find plenty of footage about him talking about interrogating, speaking with, dealing with Oswald, even joking that, well, joking with Lee, well, gee, Lee, I hope if anybody does take a shot at you, that they're as good a shot as you are, because I don't want to get killed. Okay, the guy cuffed to him on what, from our vantage point, would be the left side of the screen, is Jim Lavelle. The guy on the right side cuffed to him is L.C. Graves. Okay. Now, this is also an interesting misnomer, and I find this fascinating, and this is why I put the video up and the newsreel footage up also of Ruby killing Oswald. It's been edited several times. But it went out live the first time, okay? You can actually watch this happen. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are actually 6 motion picture cameras running and 3 audio tapes running in the basement of the of City Hall at that time. They tell the media we're going to move them at 9 o'clock. They don't bother to move them until about 11:30. When they do, coincidentally, Jack Ruby is right down the street at a Western Union office, making the second wire transfer to a dancer employee of his for cash in 24 hours, by the way. And according to the official story, he walks down a ramp, despite the fact that it's being guarded by at least 2 police officers. He is unseen, arrives a few moments before Oswald emerges from inside of an elevator and in a small inner office area into the parking garage. The Dallas police have the car that they actually intend to transport him with out of position, and Jack Ruby is able, because that car is out of position and because of all the confusion and the lights and everything else, is able to step in front of the entire world watching Oswald being transferred and pump 1 bullet into his gut and kill him right there in front of the world. Oswald survived for a few moments after the shot was fired, and like I said, you can find that video on my YouTube channel as well, plus an analyzation of a reenactment from a couple of years ago where I explain exactly how badly the Discovery Channel likes to lie to you. You can take a look at that. But the deal is that he did that. He was immediately taken into custody. Oswald was dragged into a back room where an EMT intern, who was provided to them by Parkland Hospital, immediately starts to work on Oswald and does chest compressions with a guy who has a gunshot wound in his abdomen. Okay?
Well, he was an intern.
Yeah, well, he was an intern, but, I think a monkey might know, stop pumping up and down on the guy who's got a hole in him. Maybe, possibly.
I mean, let's be fair. It was probably stupidity.
Well, okay, we'll give them stupidity. Then they had a whole sort of misadventure trying to get the damn ambulance in there to be able to take him to Parkland Hospital.
Okay, well, that's unexcusable.
So then they finally do rail him out there. He's unconscious, he's pale, and you can see the film of that as well up on my channel too. And they stick him in the back of what looks like a little station wagon, because that at the time is what they used for ambulances, as well as, sort of makeshift hearses, to be able to bring Oswald to the very same hospital where John F. Kennedy died, on Friday. So this is Sunday, and they're bringing him to the same hospital. They send him to the trauma room across the hall from where Kennedy was, and immediately begin to go to work on him. Individuals inside the ambulance have stated, though, that they were pretty sure they felt him let go on the way to the hospital, like his body tensed up and he just went limp and was never heard from again, never made a statement again, and died on an operating table in Parkland Hospital, like I said, on the Sunday following the Friday in which Kennedy died, nearly exactly 48 hours later. Now, there's a whole misadventure in trying to get him buried and everything else, but awfully nasty and meaty way for the, the most valuable prisoner since John Wilkes Booth to be waltzed in front of a crowd of people with bright lights on him in a basement with more than 70 police officers present, as well as Secret Service, FBI, news media, and everything else. And meanwhile, a illiterate, hot-tempered, Jewish, supposedly mob-connected club owner just sneaks in there, pulls a gun, and pops him in the gut and kills him on live television. I ask you, where in the world does, some common sense about how these things occur come into the thinking of the American public that they bought this crap?
Well, it was a pretty believable thing back then because there wasn't the internet, and what you took then was believed as fact, was perceived as the gospel.
Yeah, but here's the problem, is if you can witness this yourself on live television, okay, and people did, I mean, you got to be kidding me. Nothing looks suspicious about that. People were glued to their televisions all weekend, and I do mean from Friday when the announcement happened all the way up into, including Monday night after the funeral, okay?
Oh, I'm not saying there was nothing suspicious about it. I'm just saying that we have to be fair. People weren't as inquisitive about it back then.
Well, thankfully that's not true, because there were people that were tracking the media right away. There was a first generation of researchers and critics of the investigation, the situation, the treatment of Oswald, and the media's coverage of the whole thing. And they were starting to speak out, but were not being published anywhere. They were being published in left-wing, supposedly kooky, magazines and newspapers at the time. But there were respectable individuals who had, critiques, and this is supposedly one of the greatest motives for having constructed the Warren Commission that they cling to, is that there was a need to end speculation and rumors in the country. And I can see that because there were plenty to be had. But Oswald, again, the adventures of this guy continued on even beyond the grave a little bit, because in 1981 they exhumed his body. I have that news clip up on my YouTube channel as well, and they dug him up after a long court battle to prove that he was exactly who they say he was, and that he was in the grave, and they took themselves about a year to match the dental records of Lee Harvey Oswald to the corpse they had there in Franklin Cemetery there in Texas. But speculation has continued. A whole lot of misleading information, along with some very interesting gems, have come out. And there are many a fairy tale built around this guy Oswald, who in some people's opinion is very much like a James Bond-like figure who seemed to be involved in so many different levels of secretive operations. It's mind-boggling. But then there are others who still cling to the idea that he was just a nut and got himself 3 lucky shots.
Yes, 3 almost physically impossible ones.
Right, and I've got to say that the truth, in my opinion, absolutely lies somewhere far away from those 2 points, but in between them nonetheless.
But I had somebody who's listening message me on Skype, telling me to ask you if you think Oswald planned on killing Kennedy before he left the Soviet Union.
No. There's.
He missed the majority of it. He just got here like 15, 20 minutes ago.
It's okay. I'll tell you what, I'll answer that, though, because you know what? It seems almost like a valid question. Because the idea that a guy would go to the Soviet Union and then be able to come back and everything else and then be involved in this was very convenient. But they attempted to use more than one story to frame the idea of crazy communist Oswald having been part of the, having planned this all by himself. This is why there is no good evidence for his co-conspirators, because he was, after all, involved. But, I don't believe that, first of all. The thing is this, the KGB, as well as his own accounts, which are recorded in a couple of places, as well as the accounts of other individuals that I've been able to speak to that were very close to him in the Soviet Union, give me no indication that he was involved in any sort of intrigue or planning like that whatsoever. To speak to what could have been in his own mind, let's just say for a moment that this was his absolute plan. He has a really strange way of going about it. And rather haphazardly, from his own point of view, would be arriving to the places and to the instruments of this entire situation. So I don't believe for a second that he had any sort of plans in his mind about doing anything treasonous or revolutionary when it came to his return to the United States.
I don't even think he knew until he had a gun pointed at him.
I think he didn't know that the president was dead until he had a gun pointed at him, that's for sure. I think he knew that something happened, and I do postulate the possibility that he had been told that he was going to be part of an operation, maybe, and this is heavy speculation on my part, that he may have been told that if they faked an assassination attempt at Kennedy, that they would whip up public opinion and would whip up the Kennedy administration into a position where an invasion of Cuba or further incursions into other countries which were communist supported might have been feasible.
Except they lied to him.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's really evident because, again, if you own, let's just take the fact, first of all, it's very contentious that he even owned the weapons, okay, because he's receiving a rifle supposedly in the mail, and the documentation required to be able to ship a rifle to someone in the mail at that time is non-existent. Postal regulations are completely violated because it was shipped to an A.J. Heidel, not Lee Harvey Oswald, which is supposed to be one of his aliases. However, the individuals allowed to retrieve mail at the post office box that he was renting at the time did not include any A.J. Heidel, okay? Which meant that, in reality, the gun should have been sent back to Klein Sporting Goods with a tag that said, "Return to sender, no such person." Okay? There's all kinds of violations of the chain of custody here, and of the regulations of postal regulations by the United States Postal Service regarding the rifle and the handgun. The handgun is even stranger because they were using something called Railway Express to ship it to him, and it was shipped to a post office box again, and that is like stating that UPS will deliver to a post office box when they don't. And again, the records there are missing.
Hey, Chuck, we're gonna have to
Sure.
start wrapping it up. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I have to go early.
Not a problem.
When do you want to do part 2?
Whenever you're ready, Dylan, you let me know. I've got my own show that broadcasts on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. As I told you, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 8
The
is
person
unavailable.
I'm available, but
And Saturday, 8 to 10 is unavailable. But outside of that, I'll work around your schedule, Wes.
okay. And the person who asked you the question
Uh-huh.
said he wanted to debate you on a different topic, but he also said you changed his view on this topic.
Okay, well, I always welcome debate, and you know, if you want, you can reach me by email.
Is it all right if I send you if I send him your Skype contact?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Because I'm talking to him over Skype. I gave him the link.
No problem. Just anybody listening, in fact, if you want to make a Skype contact with me, I may not keep it, but I'll invite it to start with. You can just request contact at charles.ocelli, spelled Ochelli. And hopefully you know how to spell Charles. That is my Skype ID, and I'll be more than happy to discuss, debate, broadcast with, and whatever else.
He wants to come on to the show next time we talk and debate 9/11 with us, if you're up for that.
I may very well be up for that, sure.
He wants to debate the topic with you and me.
No problem. I've got a lot of opinions regarding that, and not all of them are popular either. But
no, same here.
But you know, but I did spend 20 years on this, and 9/11 wasn't even 20 years ago yet. So I guarantee that I don't have as great a research base as.
Well, they also released 26 volumes for that one.
Well, that is another key interesting thing, is that, you know what, we had the Warren Commission report and then the 26 volumes that came along with it, but the 9/11 Commission report, they kept all their paperwork to themselves this time. I think they really learned their lesson.
Well, yeah, it wasn't even sloppy. This one wasn't even sloppy until they released the information.
Well, there you go. There you go. All right, Dylan, well, if we're all done, if you want to mention anything else, or you want me to mention anything else, you know, we'll wrap it up your way.
All right, thanks for coming on. Dude, I hope we can do this again, and I know we will, because there's a lot to talk about on this topic.
Absolutely, and I hope to get into, you know, Dealey Plaza in and of itself. I hope to get into the mythology of the JFK case, because there is a lot of it out there, a lot of misconceptions, misinformation, disinformation, and straight-up fairy tales out there. And I don't like to engage in, you know, propagating any of that nonsense. I am after the truth. I have always been after the truth, and I think that it is important that we know exactly what happened that day, because without it, we would not have experienced the horrors of Vietnam. We would not experience the current climate of government secrecy, of black operations being conducted in our own names, and the further enhancement of the military-industrial complex as it exists, and the absolute devastation of the American reality that we were promised as children and have been denied as adults.
And that we're being denied today.
Absolutely.
What time would you be good for early tomorrow?
Early tomorrow?
Like noonish.
I could try that.
Okay, well, and that one will be about 9/11.
Oh, okay.
If that's good with you.
Why not? Let's do it.
Yeah, my friend wants to debate you on the topic, and I'd actually like to get your take on it, too.
Well, I would love to see what he wants to debate, because I'd love to know about it, but we'll just discover it as we do on the air.
All right, thank you for coming on. I hope we can do this again soon, and we'll see you next time.
All right, Dylan, keep on keeping on.
Yep, keep on doing your research, because we know there's a lot left.
Oh, yes.
Yep. All right. See ya.
Take care.
You too.